The complex tapestry, unraveling the relationship between Jesus and the Pharisees. The relationship between Jesus of Nazareth and the Pharisees is one of the most frequently discussed and often misunderstood aspects of the New Testament. Far from a monolithic opposition, their interactions reveal a complex tapestry of theological debate, social tension, and surprising common ground. This documentary explores the historical context, key disagreements, and unexpected similarities that characterize the dynamic between Jesus and this influential Jewish sect, offering a nuanced understanding of their intertwined narratives. Who were the Pharisees? The Pharisees were a prominent religious and social movement within Judaism during the Second Temple period, from the 2nd century BCE to the 1st century CE. Their name, derived from a Hebrew word meaning separated, reflected their commitment to ritual purity and strict adherence to the Mosaic law. Unlike the Sadducees, who were primarily aristocratic priests focused on temple rituals, the Pharisees were largely middle-class laymen, including scribes and scholars, who held significant popular support among the Jewish people. Key tenets of Pharisaic belief included oral tradition, resurrection and afterlife, and personal piety. They gave equal authority to oral traditions alongside the written Torah, believing these traditions were passed down from Moses and provided necessary interpretations for contemporary life. They believed in the resurrection of the dead, an afterlife with divine judgment, and the existence of angels and demons. They emphasized personal piety and the observance of all 600-plus laws of the Torah, extending ritual purity practices from the temple to everyday life for all Jews. Within Pharisaism, there were different schools of thought, notably those of Shammai and Hillel. Shammai advocated for a stricter interpretation of the law, while Hillel promoted a more lenient and gracious application. This internal diversity suggests that the Pharisees were not a single, unified group, but rather a dynamic movement with varying perspectives. Points of contention, theological and social debates. While Jesus shared some common ground with the Pharisees, particularly in their belief in the resurrection and the importance of the law, their disagreements were profound and often centered on the interpretation and application of Jewish law, especially regarding the Sabbath, purity, and table fellowship. The Sabbath controversies. One of the most frequent points of conflict between Jesus and the Pharisees revolved around the observance of the Sabbath. The Gospels record several instances where Jesus' actions or those of his disciples were deemed by the Pharisees to violate their strict interpretations of Sabbath regulations. For example, Jesus' disciples plucking grain on the Sabbath and Jesus healing on the Sabbath were met with strong criticism. The Pharisees had developed numerous oral traditions to define what constituted forbidden work on the Sabbath, often going beyond the explicit commands of the Torah. Jesus, however, emphasized the spirit of the law over its rigid application, famously stating, "The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath." He challenged their legalistic approach, arguing that acts of mercy and compassion were permissible, even on the Sabbath. Purity laws and table fellowship. Another significant area of disagreement concerned purity laws and table fellowship. The Pharisees meticulously observed laws of ritual purity, believing that all Jews should live with the same level of purity as priests serving in the temple. This often led to practices that separated them from those they considered unclean, including tax collectors and sinners. Jesus, in contrast, frequently engaged in table fellowship with individuals considered outcasts by society, such as tax collectors and sinners. This practice was scandalous to the Pharisees, who believed that such associations would defile Jesus and his disciples. Jesus, however, declared that he had come not to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance. His inclusive approach to table fellowship symbolized his mission to bring salvation to all, regardless of their social or religious standing, and challenged the Pharisees' understanding of purity as primarily external and ritualistic. While Jesus was concerned with purity, his emphasis was on internal purity of the heart rather than external ritualistic adherence. He criticized the Pharisees for focusing on outward appearances while neglecting the more important matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness, common ground and shared values. Despite their frequent clashes, Jesus and the Pharisees shared significant theological and ethical commonalities. Both believed in the authority of the Torah, the existence of angels and demons, and the resurrection of the dead. Jesus often quoted from the Old Testament, a practice central to Pharisaic teaching, and many of his ethical teachings, such as the Golden Rule, resonated with Pharisaic principles. Indeed, some scholars suggest that Jesus himself may have been closer to the Pharisaic tradition than to any other Jewish group of his time. He was even called Rabbi, a title often associated with Pharisaic teachers. Not all Pharisees were opposed to Jesus. Nicodemus, a prominent Pharisee, sought out Jesus for teaching and later defended him before the Sanhedrin and assisted in his burial. The Apostle Paul, initially a zealous Pharisee, later became a fervent follower of Christ, demonstrating that conversion from Pharisaism to Christianity was possible. The significance of the relationship. The complex relationship between Jesus and the Pharisees was not merely a series of personal disputes. It represented a fundamental tension within Judaism regarding the interpretation and application of God's law. The Pharisees, in their earnest desire to uphold the law and maintain Israel's holiness, had, in Jesus' view, sometimes lost sight of its ultimate purpose: love for God and neighbor. Jesus' critiques of the Pharisees, particularly his woes in Matthew 23, were not a blanket condemnation of all Pharisees, but rather a sharp rebuke of hypocrisy and legalism. He challenged them to move beyond a superficial observance of rules to a deeper, heartfelt commitment to justice, mercy, and faithfulness. Their interactions, therefore, serve as a powerful theological dialogue on the nature of true righteousness, the spirit of the law, and the inclusive scope of God's kingdom. Conclusion: the relationship between Jesus and the Pharisees was multifaceted, marked by both profound disagreements and surprising points of convergence. By examining their interactions through a historical and theological lens, we gain a richer understanding of the vibrant religious landscape of first-century Judaism and the revolutionary nature of Jesus' teachings. Their debates were not simply about minor legal technicalities, but about the very heart of faith and how one lives in covenant with God. Ultimately, the story of Jesus and the Pharisees continues to challenge believers to seek genuine righteousness, rooted in love and compassion, rather than mere outward conformity.